Thank you so much for the invitation. It's a real pleasure for me to be with you today and to take part to this very important project, which is eProtect. And I have been following all the presentation last week and already today. And I feel it's really not only interesting, but so important that we continue working to protect victims of all forms of violence, but especially in the family and especially when it comes to gender-based violence. So it's a bit of a challenge for me because I'm going to take the floor on behalf of my new capacity as a member of the Committee on the Rights of the Child. I only started my mandate in the beginning of this month, so it's a bit new for me, and I didn't took part yet as member to the monitoring process, to any of the session of the committee. And so I had to dig a bit in the work of the committee in the last years to try to find all the most relevant information that could be useful for you in the frame of this conference. I hope that you can see my screen and my presentation. Is it the case?
Yes,
Perfect.
yes, we can see it.
Okay.
Thank you.
So first of all, the legal framework has been already recalled by Theoni before concerning the most relevant articles of the CRC, and she did mention Article 19, of course, which is the basis when it comes to violence against children. I would add Article 39, which is for me very important also to promote the recovery and reintegration of victims, very important when it comes to this topic. And then, of course, the optional protocol on sale of children, child prostitution and child pornography, which is unfortunately also very important for the work in the frame of this project. So let me just recall briefly, I think that most of you must be quite familiar with that, but the role of the committee. The Committee on the Rights of the Child is the monitoring body, which is in charge of monitoring, ensuring that states that have ratified the convention do implement it in the right way. Which are the means used by the committee to do so? First of all, the most common monitoring process is to analyze state reports. So the states have to draft a report to send it to the committee, normally every 5 years. And the committee gathers these state report, alternative reports, and issue recommendation after having heard to the civil society, the UN agencies, children, group of children, very important, and of course the representative of the state. After this process, the committee issued recommendations sorry, I have a message here. Sorry. Okay, there we go. So the committee draft recommendation and at the end of the process, and I don't know why my presentation is changing without me doing anything. And those recommendations are really important for, is someone changing my presentation? I see that my screen is changing. I don't know what happens. I stop and I share it again because yeah, there is something wrong with the presentation.
We can see it clearly.
You can see it. Okay,
yes.
so sorry for this. Okay, so these are the recommendations. Then another very important means to implement and follow up the monitoring of the convention is to adopt general comment. A general comment is an interpretation of some topics of the convention and gives the views of the committee on how should we apply different articles of the convention. Then the committee organized days of general discussion. The next one will be in September and will deal with alternative care, which is a very important moment to gather all stakeholders and try to have a common discussion on one specific and important topic. And when it comes to our topic of violence against children, of course, the field of alternative care is very important too. And then the committee receives individual complaints and conduct inquiries. This is only possible in the states that have ratified the third optional protocol. And I should recommend the representative of states that haven't ratified this protocol to advocate for this ratification, because this is a very important tool also for the civil society to bring individual cases and complaints to the committee when the procedure at national level hasn't deliver a good result concerning one individual child. I will not enter into all the procedure because this would be much too long. But finally, the committee also conducts inquiries when there is grave or systematic violation of children's rights. And so this also could be a very powerful tool for the states, for NGOs to identify when there are huge gaps or important gaps in the legislation or the implementation of the legislation, and when your advocacy at national level doesn't deliver and gives good results, I think that is a very important way to try to improve the situation. So this I did already. Why? Okay, there we go. Just a quick snapshot in a few general comments. There are already nowadays 25 general comments. So you can imagine that those cover already a large, broad range of rights and issues. So I'm not going to enter into all of them, but I want to mention the general comment number 13, which is key in our work now. It deals with the right of the child to freedom from all forms of violence. It recalls that violence occurs in the family, and this is probably the environment where the most and the highest level of violence take place. And so it's very important to have a look at that. It recalls also that one have to fight against all forms of violence, and there is a very broad range of violence, not only physical but also psychological and other forms of violence, also institutional violence. States have to adopt all appropriate measures, and it explains at length all the kind of measures that states should approve and implement. And there is a range of intervention, prevention, identification, reporting, referral mechanism that should be in place at national level. So I encourage you to have a look at this general comment to see how to implement Article 19 of the Convention. Then the general comment 20 on the rights of the child during adolescence. This is a more recent general comment, and it's an important one too, because it deals with time of the life of a child where we assume that there is less vulnerability because the child is a bit older, but it's not always the case. There is a lot of risk and vulnerabilities attached to this age time, adolescence, and especially for groups of children that are undergoing violence and abuse. The general comment mentioned girls, the LGBT community, migrants, Roma, and other ones. It clearly focuses on gender-based violence, also traditional concept of masculinity, and other approaches that are very important, also traditional harmful practices that are used in some communities. And it calls upon states to scale up institutional program to prevent, rehabilitate, and support adolescent victims. Then a quick view on the general comment 22, which deal more with a group of children who are also identified as being at risk of violence. We are talking about migrant children who are really at risk of high level of gender-based violence, sexual violence, other forms of violence, also trafficking for sexual labor and exploitation, and who need a specific response, specific support, and sometimes specific services to support them when they face this kind of violence. Then, if you allow me, I would like to enter into a few of the what we call the concluding observations, COBs, concerning different states. So I gather some of the recommendations from different reports, concluding observation, which deal with violence against children, to see what kind of recommendation the committees issue concerning states. I just would like, before entering the content, to recall the importance for the civil society to use this mechanism, to try to draft reports and to come up with a concrete question and concrete recommendation that you would like to see in the final concluding observation concerning your states, because this will be a very important tool that you can use in your work and advocacy work. If you prepare as good as possible your report, you will see your recommendation reflected in the final observation, and you can follow up on that. It's not only you as NGO saying that in your country, it will be the Committee on Rights of the Child who says that, so you will have more strength to continue advocating at national level. So a few of the important recommendations. First, violence against children is identified as one of the 9 clusters in the reporting guidelines. So that means that every state has to report on how they implement and what is the state of the policy of the state when it comes to responding to violence against children. There is usually, or most of the time, a reference to the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals, and especially the goal 16.2, which recalls that states have the duty to fight against violence against children. And of course, the committee always recall to adopt legislation which really address the issue of violence, and to repeal inadequacy of legislation, because very often there are gaps in the legislation. Then sometimes the committee deals with the level of penalties when they feel that the level of penalty is really too low when it comes to violence against children, of offenses against children, because it gives the impression that it's not a really important offense. The committee asked also the state to repeal legal provision that excuse perpetrator of domestic violence, and this still exists in some countries. You have a cause of excuse for perpetrators, which is a shame. Also repeal all legal provision that authorize, condone, or lead to child sexual abuse and criminalize marital rape. So here again, there are gaps in the legislation. The committee calls upon states to set up a minimum age of sexual consent. It's not the case in all states, and repeal all legislation treating child victims as offenders. We know that this is a huge problem. Identify a victim as offender, it's even worse, and it's part of the re-victimization. Very often the committee recommends the adoption of national plans of prevention, and I heard in the intervention before that we need to have every country need to have such plans, need to establish specific child protection units also. It has been mentioned in other speeches that we need professionals that are specifically trained to deal with the victims and children, and you don't address a child in the same way as you address an adult. And then the need to allocate enough resources to address the root causes of violence. This is also part of the recommendation of the committee. the establishment of reporting and complaint mechanism, which are effective, efficient, independent, and that will give a solution to the child. It's not only a principle, it's not only on paper, it has to be implemented and accessible for children. So you need to inform children, to support children, to use those complaint mechanisms. Establishment of independent inquiry, investigation, prosecution, punishment of perpetrators, all this is also very important. Also a compensation scheme to support the victim and to repair the damages caused to the victim. Of course, the prohibition of all corporal punishment by law, that's very well known, but still not the case in some, even in some European country. I'm well placed in Belgium to say that it's not always the case. Establishment of complaint mechanisms that are safely and confidential, strengthening and expanding awareness raising program, and then fighting against some forms of harmful practice, among other, the FGM, female genital mutilation. Then a few other issues that are also important, mechanism, procedure, guidelines to ensure the mandatory reporting cases of sexual abuse and exploitation, child-friendly and effective reporting channel, regular training of professional and early detection and reporting. And finally, concerning the COBs, paying more attention to the gender dimension of sexual exploitation and abuse, and an attention given to the existence of helpline and other support mechanisms. So these are the recommendations that are issued by the committee and that should be implemented by the states. Finally, and I will end my presentation on that. As I mentioned, there is the possibility to submit individual communication complaint to the committee. And at least in one case, maybe there are a few other cases, but in one case, and I took this as an example, there is a decision stating that one state had to evaluate the risk of a violation of the rights of the child when the state was willing to deport a family to a country of origin. There was a risk of violation of and subject of female genital mutilation in the country of origin, and in that case, the committee concluded that there was a failure to consider the best interest of the child in this specific situation. So that's an example that shows that if you see a situation that doesn't give you a good result at national level, then you can use this mechanism. And the inquiry mechanism that is also attached to this optional protocol 3 is a mechanism that allows you to bring collective complaint and not only one case of violation of children's rights, but more global situation. So for, as I said, for NGO, it's probably an important topic that you can use. So thank you for your attention, and I hope that I let you enter a bit into the recommendation of the committee and convinced you of the importance of using that mechanism in your advocacy work at national level. Thank you very much.